is good. Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1642. We will continue with our incredible endeavor with reading Life, Death by Jacques Derrida. And we are currently on page 62 in the English version. Third session. We've been talking about Nietzsche. Nietzsche, who gave first seed to continental philosophy. And many philosophers who can call them successors or inspired by Nietzsche's work. Derrida is definitely one of them. And we've been talking about different double takes and how metaphor brings something from the static, the father, and does something motherly, or the mother, the contingent, the flexible, the metaphor. And in such a fashion, the text is constantly being brought forward. It's not stuck, stable, or fixed. It's the changing feature that can make the message be of the same nature, I would say. Whereas, as we have shown, exact copying is a falsification. It belies the foundation of the text. All living texts change because it's the movement that brings the message, the gospel, the philosophy. The will, Nietzsche would say. I think Nietzsche had a very keen and thorough understanding of this movement. He knew that change was cause of all stability. I think with the help of Derrida, we can make that tendency even stronger. And we've been talking about how metaphors compete in a Darwinian fashion. The law of the strongest, as it's called. Inspired by Darwin and then brought beyond Darwin. Going even further. And we ended. It is a very enigmatic possibility. That's line 9, I think. We've been talking about this evolution of metaphors. It is a very enigmatic possibility, since it leads to a form of statement of the law of the strongest that contradicts itself and immediately reverses itself. How can force be less strong or forceful than itself? How can the weak be stronger than the strongest? And how can such a statement even be intelligible? And if we allow this, we will not have to reconsider all its premises, everything that concerns, for example, the process of reproduction and the principle of pleasure. Does not this inversion in the process of life forces imply that somewhere in life itself, as life itself, a force of death is at work, and something like a beyond the pleasure principle I leave these questions suspended for the time being in order to make just a few remarks before returning to Kangalem and to Jacob. One, the lucidity with which Nietzsche credited Darwin in 1872 with regard to thinking in images gets its payback from what Nietzsche in 1888 defines as Darwin's blindness. How can one be so blind, he will ask. To what was Darwin blind? Well, to nothing other than this transgression by life of its own law. This strange logic of the will to power that selects to the advantage of the weakest. This transgression of the law by law itself. This transgression of law being the law, dictating the law. We are only beginning to investigate this type of logic. The step beyond of the law. I will simply mention the two texts of 1888 titled Anti-Darwin. They are part of the collection titled With All the Reservations that this might rightly inspire the will to power. In the first, Nietzsche writes, "What surprises me most when I survey the broad destinies of man is that I always see before me the opposite of that which Darwin and his school see or want to see today." From the beginning, Nietzsche locates this debate in a sort of struggle for vision. He sees contrary of what Darwin and his school see or want to see. The implication being that seeing itself is directed by an interest or a desire that selects what he will, what the will to power wants or do not want. Wants without wanting. To see the denegation being always inscribed somewhere in the optical and in an already selective putting into perspective. What surprises me most when I survey the broad destinies of man is that I always see before me the opposite of that which Darwin and his school see or want. Selection in favor of the stronger, better constituted, and the progress of the species. Precisely the opposite is palpable. The elimination of the lucky strokes, the uselessness of the more highly developed types, the inevitable dominion of the average, even the sub-average types. If we are not shown why man should be an exception among creatures, I incline to the prejudice that the school of Darwin has been deluded everywhere. That will to power in which I recognize the ultimate ground and character of all change provides us with the reason why selection is not in favor of the exceptions and lucky strokes. The strongest and most fortunate are weak when opposed by organized herd instincts, by the timidity of the weak, by the vast majority. My general view of the world of values shows that it is not the lucky strokes, the select types that have the upper hand in the supreme values that are today placed over mankind. Rather, it is the decadent types. Perhaps there is nothing in the world more interesting than this little desired spectacle. Little desired is here underscored. This spectacle of selection in reverse, which makes of decadence something elite, a form of election is very intriguing. Nothing is more interesting, says Nietzsche, but it is also, by essence, a little desired spectacle. One that is contrary to desire. It is the spectacle of the inversion of desire, of the beyond of desire, or of the principle of desire. This is also what makes it interesting. Not very natural. Desire is interested by non-desire as the very thing that provokes the most. How can one not desire or not be desired? That is what is most exciting for vision, la vie, and for life, la vie. And by the very same token, what is most intriguing for whoever sees is the one who does not see. And by the same token, it is not only the spectacle of selection in reverse that excites vision, but the spectacle of a theory that is blind to this inversion. For example, Darwin's theory. Insofar as it blinds itself to this inversion, to this law of the inversion of the law. How can one be so blind? Nietzsche asks a little further down. I see all philosophers. I see science kneeling before a reality that is the reverse of the struggle for existence as taught by Darwin's school. That is to say, I see on top and surviving everywhere those who comprise life and the value of life. The error of the school of Darwin becomes a problem to me. How can one be so blind as to see so badly at this point? This blindness, which you will recall, belongs to the event of the dead father. It is at the age his father died, according to the Rätselform of Ecce Homo, that Nietzsche, as it were, lost his vision while waiting for the process of regeneration to kick in. This blindness of Darwinian theory, astonishing as it may be, is an effect of the law, and astonishing as it may be, it is not fortuitous, or at least it corresponds to the elimination of the fortuitous, of chance, an elimination that is programmed by the law. In this sense, Darwinian theory, in its very blindness, is a symptom of degeneration, blindness to the inverse transgression, to the transgression of the law of selection, is an effect of the law. And finally, of the law of eternal return, inasmuch as it is blinding. Blinding by clarity, but by a clarity such that one can only blind oneself, want to blind oneself before it. The enigma to which the seemingly Oedipian Rätselform of Ecce Homo refers us is the enigma of the eternal return. The eternal return can announce itself only in the form of the enigma. This affinity between blinding oneself and the enigmatic form is essential. Here it is on display in a fragment from 1885 that speaks of this will to blindness, to this desire to lose one's vision as the very experience of lucidity with regard to the eternal return. Read The Will to Power, Volume 1, page 216, fragment 51. And do you know what the world is to me? That I show it to you in my mirror. This world, a monster of energy, without beginning, without end. A firm iron magnitude of force that does not grow bigger or smaller, that does not expend itself, but only transform itself as a whole of unalterable size, a household without expenses or losses, but likewise without increase or income, enclosed by nothingness as a boundary, not something blurry or wasted, not something endlessly extended, but set in a definite space as a definite force. Not a space that might be empty here or there, but rather as force throughout, as a play of forces and waves of forces, at the same time one and many, increasing here and at the same time decreasing there. A sea of forces flowing and rushing together, eternally changing, eternally flooding back. With tremendous years of recurrence, with an ebb and a flood, of its forms, out of the simplest forms, striving toward the most complex, out of the stillest, most rigid, coldest forms, toward the hottest, most turbulent, most self-contradictory. And then again, returning home to the simple, out of this abundance, out of the play of contradictions, back to the joy of concord, still affirming itself in this uniformity of its courses and its years, blessing itself as that which must return eternally, as a becoming that knows no satiety, no disgust, no weariness. This my Dionysian world of the eternally self-creating, the eternally self-destroying, this mystery world of the twofold voluptuous delight. My beyond good and evil, without goal, unless the joy of the circle is itself a goal. Without will, unless a ring has the goodwill to return eternally on itself and on nothing but itself in its own orbit. This universe that is mine, who is lucid enough to see it without wanting to lose his sight, strong enough to expose his soul to the mirror, to oppose his own mirror to the mirror of Dionysus. To propose his own solution to the enigma of Dionysus. And should not the one who is capable of this do even more? pledge himself to the rings of rings, promise his own return, accept the ring where he will eternally bless himself, affirm himself, with a will to wanting everything once again. To see return all the things that once were. To want to meet everything that must ever be. Do you know at present what the world is for me? And what I want when I want this world? Do you want a name for this world? A solution for all its riddles? A light for you, too, you best concealed, strongest, most intrepid, most midnightly man. This world is the will to power, and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power, and nothing besides. We now look at some outtakes of the text. It's pretty rich in outtakes. In the first quote on page 62, it's one of the first opposing words against Darwin in his text aptly titled Anti-Darwin. Calls him blind. And in the quote you can see is, what surprises me most when I survey the broad destinies of man is that I always see before me the opposite, of which Darwin and his school see or want. Want is underscored for good reasons. It is the want that lies behind. Very important. And further down, And his schools see or want to see the implication being that seeing itself is directed by an interest or desire that selects what the will to power wants or do not want. Wants without wanting. To see the denegation being always inscribed in the optical and in an already selected putting into perspective. And the last line on the same page, we find I see on top and surviving everywhere those who compromise life and the value of life. And he points out this is the error of the school of Darwin, as to make no doubt of wherein the problem lies. And in the quote from The Will to Power, fragment 51, about 12 lines from the bottom. And he compares this world with a want is the world of want, you could say. A household without expenses or losses, but likewise without increase or income, enclosed by nothingness as a boundary, not something blurry or wasted, not something endlessly extended, but set in a definite space as a definite force, and not a space that might be empty here and there. But rather as force throughout, a play of forces and waves of forces at the same time, one and many. And of the third sentence of the bottom, take out most self-contradictory. That is an important aspect of the will. It is always self-contradictory. That's why there are two forces in Nietzsche, the Apollonian and Dionysian. This is what makes truth come about. And of course, it also stands of falsehood. This emptiness, the boundless emptiness and nothingness, that's the apeiron also. The source of everything from everything ultimately stem. And on page 65, There's a very short reference to oppose his own mirror to the mirror of Dionysus. It's like the 10th line. Remember Rudolf Gachet, one of the most excellent interpreters and interlocutors of Derrida. The mirror is constantly present when force is about. The opposition, the negation, the contradictory, all important features. It is like a rope, two strings put together to make a rope twisted, going in each direction. That's the necessity of contradictions. And here we have it at the very last of this same quote. This world is the will to power and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power, further down at the very end of the site. And you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides. Darwin is not oppositions enough. It doesn't mature into the fullness of oppositions. It's only one-sided. And Nietzsche points out it leads to meekness, generalities, taking out distinctions and exceptions. No more are there any lucky chances. The world to power means that the wanting is behind everything, and the wanting has at its opposal no want, not willingness, which is the energy of the whole thing that drives it. It is like fire and water, existence and non-existence. That brings out the truthfulness. Darwin is just too one-sided, something discovered by Nietzsche after 10 years before he admired him, which is also an opposition of sorts. I think that makes the message even stronger. This is taking everything about mother, the rigor of the father, and the contingency and flexibility of the mother one step further. Leading it into the will itself. That is also the development of Nietzsche. There is no mentioning that the mirroring of Dionysus is at Apollo. But I think it becomes pretty obvious when mirror is mentioned here. I do recommend in the same strain here, The Tale of the Mirror of Rudolf Gachet. He goes into this very carefully, very deep. And maybe some comments, any questions, comments?
Yes, let's go to page 64. Page 64. The previous page 64.
Yes.
Yes, here about 10 page lines from above. Enigma, which the seemingly Oedipian rat cell form of Ecce Homo refers us is the enigma of the eternal return. The
Yes.
eternal return can announce itself only in the form of the enigma. This affinity between blinding oneself and the enigmatic form is essential. So my reflection here is the parallel to Emperor Nero, whom we discussed yesterday. And Nero is, according to legend, always returning, although Nero is probably dead. But there is always this enigma of the eternal return. And eternal return, I think this phrase is the most important. Eternal return can announce itself only in the form of the enigma.
Yes.
So there is, of course, an enigma. This is exciting that our Nero could perhaps return one day. It's an enigma. But what is Derrida's slash Nietzsche's point of the eternal return? So let's compare this blinding oneself. This is like Emperor Nero killing himself, committing suicide. I don't know if this is a good comparison.
Well, the desire is to blind oneself, to make yourself alive, to make you unseeing to be able to see, to make yourself dead in order to return.
So the blinding refers not perhaps so much to Nero, but rather his followers who hope for his return. So to say.
Yes. Yeah. Makes sense.
And we can also about Darwin. So he was speaking about the chance. So in Darwinian's model, you both need chance, but you also don't need it. So evolution and our life became by chance, according to Darwin. But then Darwin eliminates chance because in his model it's only the strongest
Yes,
who
he
survives.
eliminates chance. Very good. Exactly. That's what he does. He eliminates chance.
Although there is a chance in the origin, you have a chance, but then it disappears.
And this is sort of what Nietzsche discovers, if you like, if I put it that way.
Yes, absolutely. And in this model, you have, as you mentioned, you have. So what does Darwin do? He eliminates the weaker person or the mother.
Yes.
But Nietzsche points out, as you pointed out, that you need also the weak person. That is a chance. Because much of life is happenstance.
Happenstance is needed. And Darwin makes it too rigid, according to Nietzsche.
And if we apply these insights to the enigma of the eternal return, so how is eternal return works in Darwin's model? He doesn't explicitly speak about eternal return. It is still circular, much of the reasoning in Darwin, because it's always the strongest, or strongest survives. So it's the eternal return of the strongest in Darwin. And the strongest could be, let's say, Emperor Nero, in one sense. And I was also thinking in this dualism between Apollo and Dionysus, according, so we could compare Apollo to the male reason, while Dionysus is the female unreason, the wildness of the mother. Darwin, so to say, eliminates Dionysus, the mother, and wants on with the reason, or not perhaps reason, but the power of Apollo, the muscles.
Yes.
And it could be also interesting to compare Emperor Nero. He compared himself to Apollo. There is actually also a scholarly paper.
I didn't know
So
that.
why was Emperor Nero
Very
drawn to?
interesting. What paper was that?
I could actually open it here if you give me a second. So let me show it here. I have it on desktop. Let me see. Yes, here I have it. There's a paper from 2003. I open it here. It's opening here. It's called Nero, Apollo and the Poets. Nero, Apollo and the Poets, 2003. It could be interesting perhaps to go through this paper. Toward the end of his reign, Nero, blah blah blah, he combated his Apollo.
It is an interesting double take, and Nietzsche is the starter of the continental philosophy that sort of acquires the double take. It's always truth and falsehood, it's life and death. Whereas the other side, the Darwinian one-sidedness, remains in England, and almost like philosophy over there dies, disappears. It becomes in the end just a skeleton called the analytical philosophy, which is of much less importance in that country than philosophy on the continent. Interesting development, the Darwinian one-sidedness. I think I have to terminate that for a while.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end the recording here. Thank you very much for participating in this interesting text. Until next, bye-bye.